That what?
I can't live patience for 2 minutes.
So no more lifting Tom over your head for a while. Not to make joke of a serious situation, but that is something that we need to be in prayer for, because that is a stress to anyone, especially families. All right, how's he blessed us? What's he done this week for us? Absolutely.
Gave us lots of rain.
Saw a beautiful rainbow coming in, even after getting pounded on from soccer practice before I made it back to the car. But I've tried. Father, we thank you so much for the opportunity to assemble together tonight as Christian brothers and sisters. We want to bring these situations before you. Medical conditions, we're thankful for some of the positive outcomes we've heard, for issues that lives have been lost, Father. We ask for comfort, we ask for guidance in each of those situations. For the realization of those family members that are left, that life here is temporary, and that only by turning to you and obeying you can we have that hope of heaven. Please guide the service tonight. Help us to be able to study, to dig into your word, to be able to learn and grow and draw closer to you in some way. In Christ we pray. Amen. Okay, so who remembers where we left off last time? Yes. All right. Sorry, I was distracted. Where did we leave off?
And Isaac was born?
Haven't been born yet. We are within a year.
Okay.
We're within a year of Isaac's birth. So Abraham is somewhere around Bethel. Wow. Here, I thought I was loud enough without it. Abraham was around Bethel. He had just been promised by God that Isaac was going to be born within a year. So when did this take place? They're all sitting around the tent. Who visited him? 3 strangers, one of which was God. We can assume the other 2 were a couple angels. God and Abraham had this very interesting conversation. Where did God say he was heading? 2 cities? Sodom and Gomorrah. What was he going to do to them? Destroy them. What did Abraham say? Yeah, first of all, I said, God, now, you are a just God. You would not do such a thing. Basically, I know better than you, God. You wouldn't do this. That's essentially what Abraham said. He said, what if there are 50 people that are left? What are you going to do, God? What's God say? Fine, I'll let you have your 50 people. This continues on down until Abraham gets to what number? 10. 10 people. What's God say? If I can find 10 people in those cities that are righteous, I won't destroy them. What's God doing on the inside? My feeling? Laughing. He knows there aren't 10 righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah, but he gives Abraham a little bit of a win there, and he also teaches him a little bit more about the nature of God. He lets him see the mercy and the justice of God himself through that. So he travels to Sodom and Gomorrah, doesn't actually enter the city because we hear that 2 angels go in. Who did they meet? Who were they there for, essentially? Lot. Does Lot want to leave? No, the Bible actually says that the angels have to drag him, his wife, and his daughters out of the city so they don't get destroyed. That was the mercy of God. Lot didn't even want to leave. He knew the city was going to be destroyed. The angels dragged him out of the city. What's his wife do? Turns around, looks back. What happens to her? Pillar of salt. So you have Lot and his 2 daughters that are left. What happens to them? They go to a cave overlooking the destruction. The daughters think that Lot is the only man left alive in the world. What happens? They get them drunk and have children from Lot. Who was one of those distant descendants from one of those children? Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is a distant descendant from one of the children of that ancestral relationship. And who said the Bible was boring? That's where we left off last week. So one thing I did not actually get to. All right, Chris, if you would, please. This is our map of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, we already talked about, I think the laser does work. So Abraham is up here in Bethel. That's where God kind of and his angels make the trip down to Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, look at the next slide, please. So this is a satellite image of now the Dead Sea. You can see kind of this little spit here is what was here. All this down here today is a large mining operation. What they do is, the Dead Sea is full of minerals and other things, so they have actually created evaporation ponds. So as that water evaporates away, you can kind of see the different cells through here. So as one of these becomes empty, they go in there with large equipment and they scoop everything out. What are the two main things you think they are mining from the Dead Sea right now? Salt and potash. Interesting. Okay, I didn't bring that up last time. I forgot. So, basically ashes. It's one of the main components of what's left after something burns. Yeah. So, kind of makes sense, doesn't it? All right, so just a reminder here. My goal is not really to do a verse-by-verse study of Genesis. It's really to tell the history of the Israelite nation. So we are going to be obviously continuing through Genesis. I'm not going to be hitting every single verse, not describing every verse. It's more of telling the story, the history, and going through there. So just a reminder, and if you have any questions, comments at any point, please just raise your hand. Let's talk about it. There is no timetable here that I'm trying to keep to. Let's just talk. Let's just learn. Let's just study the Word of God. So there's that plug as a reminder. All right, so now we're going to start with new stuff. So we are in Genesis chapter 20, is where we left off last time. And as we start Genesis 20, we get to see the high moral and ethical standard of Abraham displayed again. That's sarcasm, because we get to see him lie and cheat again. So you had to remember that these are nomadic people. What's that mean? They're always moving. They have no central base. They don't have a house. They have a tent. That tent very easily moves around. Why do they do this? Why are they always moving? They're always looking for resources. They need food, they need water, they need other materials, excuse me, in order to live. So, because they live in an area, Chris?
Can you try your clicker?
I can absolutely try it. Look at that. Okay, well, we're going to skip to here. There we go. Because they live in an area that looks like this, which is around Bethel. So what they decide to do after they have this visitation from God and after Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed is they are going to move from Bethel over here down to a city called Ger. Why? Because Ger looks like this. What would you rather have? This, if you have large herds of animals, or that. That looks like a pretty good place to be, doesn't it? So they travel down to Ger. Why does Ger look like this? Why is it different from lots of vegetation, lots of grass, Bethel, a few miles away, nothing but desert? What's that? Yes and no. The water plays a major part of it because you have the Mediterranean Sea over here, but that's not what's providing the water directly for the vegetation. What direction does wind blow? At least in this area, and our area as well. West
to east. So as wind travels over water, it picks up moisture. So that moisture is blowing across the land. Now, if nothing's in its way, it's just going to keep going. You have the Judean mountains right here, part of what blocks the Dead Sea. As the moist air comes across and hits those mountains, what's the air do? It goes up. What happens as it goes up? It condenses, and that forms rain. So that's why Gear and along the coast here is a much more lush area with more vegetation, which makes it more attractive for people that have large herds of animals. So that's why they head over to Gear. Now, the area around Gear is controlled by King Abimelech. Anybody remember that name? Now, there's some uncertainty here if that's actually the guy's name or if Abimelech is more of a hereditary title. Think of Pharaoh, think of Caesar, titles like that. Every king, ruler of Egypt, man or woman, was known as Pharaoh. The same way it's going to be Caesar. There's no women, but there will be Caesar later in the Roman Empire. Why we think this is because all Abraham's son Isaac, and eventually King David all deal with a man named Abimelech. Pretty old guy. Or is it a hereditary title? The odds are that's just what the ruler is called at the time. It's something that's passed along to each generation and each ruler afterwards. Either way, Abraham decides to return to his old tricks again. He tells Sarah to say what? That she is his sister. It's Egypt all over again. So why does he do this? Why does he tell her to call her sister? He's trying to save his own neck. His concern, just like it was in Egypt, is that somebody's going to see Sarah, think, I want her. Oh, she's married. What are they going to do? Make her unmarried. How do you do that? You kill the husband. That was his concern. Who takes interest in Sarah? King Abimelech. Abimelech ends up taking Sarah. What's Abraham do? No, you can't have my wife. Here, this is my sister. This is a great guy that God decided to start his people with. Can he use us today? Yes. Are we as bad as Abraham? Yeah, mercy. Very good word. All right, so you've got to also remember, this happened one other time in Egypt. How old was Sarah in Egypt? Any idea? In Egypt, she was probably in her mid-60s. How old is she now? 89 years old. Do you think Abimelech wants her for her wisdom and conversation? If you read, we will read one actually in chapter 20, that's not the context that it is. It's very interesting. We're going to leave it at that. All right, so Abimelech takes Abraham's wife. Abraham's fine with this because, hey, he's still alive. God doesn't like this turn of events, though. And in verse 3, he appears to Abimelech in a dream. And what's he say? Behold, you are a dead man because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is married. How important is marriage to God? Okay, at least in the Old Testament, and the Old Testament has no relation to the New Testament, right? So is marriage important in the New Testament? It's still important. God takes marriage very, very seriously. And he tells Abimelech, you're a dead man. Oh, I can't even read my own note. Now, we also find out, it's not quite said yet, but there's something else that's going on in Abimelech's kingdom that I think this dream finally makes that other thing click. We're going to get that into a minute. But this is where Abimelech, his eyes are opened. Oh my goodness, I've done something terribly wrong. And what's he say? Verse 4 and 5. Now Abimelech had not come near her, talking about Sarah, and he said, Lord, will you slay a nation even though blameless? Did he not himself say to me, 'She is my sister,' and she herself said, 'He is my brother'? In the integrity of my heart, in the innocence of my hands, I have done this." That's not a bad argument, is it? Did Abimelech do anything wrong? Not knowingly. Excellent answer. God seems to agree. Verse 6 and 7, he says, "Yes, I know that in the integrity of your heart you have done this, and I also kept you from sinning against me. Therefore I did not let you touch her. Now, therefore, restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all who are yours." God seemed to take a really special interest in Abimelech because he says, "What? I kept you from sinning against me, and I did not let you touch her." Based on this context, what kind of relationship is Abimelech looking for from Sarah? Something physical, something sexual. That's the context that we get here. However, God intervened. He didn't let that happen. He somehow kept them apart and did not let Abimelech near Sarah. Verses 8 and 10. What's the result here of this dream, this discussion that Abimelech had with God? So Abimelech arose early in the morning. He didn't want to wait. He immediately rose early. He called all of his servants and told all these things in their hearing. And the men were greatly afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? And how have I sinned against you, that you have brought on me and my kingdom a great sin? You have done to me things you ought not have done. What have you encountered that you have done this thing?" What do you think Abimelech's demeanor was during this little exchange? A little bit, yes. Do you think there was a lot of finger pointing? Do you think there was some raised voices? Do you think there were some veins popping around? Abimelech has just been told by God that he's a dead man, and it's all Abraham's fault. Abimelech takes this very seriously. He is mad. What's Abraham's response? Verses 11 through 13. Abraham said, "Because I thought, surely there is no fear of God in this place. They will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she actually is my sister, the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. And it came about when God caused me to wander from my father's house that I said to her, 'This is the kindness which you will show to me. Everywhere we go, say to me, he is my brother.'" I didn't really lie. Did I? It's actually your fault, Abimelech, because she really is my sister. You gotta love Abraham. This nice, upstanding, righteous father of the Israelite nation. So, we did actually mention that there was a family connection back in the Egypt. So now we get to see it. I love family trees. Sarah is Abraham's half-sister, the daughter of his father, not the daughter of his mother. This was common back in this time. They would marry within the tribe, within the family. What happens today when a close family member has a child with another close family member? Genetics does not like it. Bad things happen. What were genetics like thousands of years ago, very close to the creation of man? Pure, absolutely pure. Our DNA was spotless. Over the generations, our DNA has broken down. Unlike evolutionists tell you, things do not come together magically. With time, they deteriorate. That's just how the world works. And that's what's happened to our DNA. When you had family members, this wasn't brother and sister marrying. This was close, but not that close. There really would not have been any trouble with the offspring because our genetics were pure closer to the time of creation. So we see now the family connection between Sarah and Abraham. Was Abraham telling a lie? Yes, he was. Technically, she was his sister. What was Abraham's intent when he told Abimelech, "She's my sister"? Abraham was lying. Even though he was technically correct, he was not telling the entire truth, and his intent was to mislead somebody else. That's a lie. Which is also another good New Testament principle, just saying. What's also something else here? A good Bible study would be on possibly judging other people before you have a chance to share the gospel with them. What's he say? I thought surely there was no fear of God in this place. What's verse 8 say? How did Abimelech and his servants react? Greatly frightened. Abraham withheld the truth of God because he didn't think they were going to be receptive to it. Have we ever done that? Don't raise your hands, because we'd all be raising them at the same time. This is also a very good principle. There are people out there that could very much benefit to hear the gospel, and that would be very receptive to it. We just have to share it and not prejudge them. Back to Genesis. God decides to use Abraham's lies here. He doesn't like it, but he uses it to bless his eventual offspring. Verse 14 and following, Abimelech then took sheep and oxen, male and female servants, and gave them to Abraham, and restored his wife Sarah to him. Abimelech said, Behold, my land is before you, settle wherever you please. To Sarah he said, Behold, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. Behold, it is your vindication before all who are with you, and before all men you are cleared. This is a lot of stuff. What's he say? Sheep, oxen, servants, and gold? Not only that, you can go anywhere in my kingdom you want to go. What's Abraham going to pick? The worst or the best spot? Do you think there's somebody living in the best spot already? What's Abimelech going to do to those people? Probably tell them to leave. Abimelech is scared to death of what God could possibly do to him. You know that God's the same then as he is now. Or do we have a little bit of fear of God? I hope so. We could all benefit to have a little bit of that same feeling that Abimelech had. Verses 17 and 18, Abraham's response. Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his maids, so that they bore children. For the Lord had closed fast all the wounds of the household of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abimelech's wife. This is the other thing that was going on when Abimelech had this dream. This is what I think. Abimelech realized this was happening. Something was wrong in his kingdom. And this dream, I think, finally made him realize this is why. Because Abraham had to pray to take this consequence of God's away from his people. Now, I don't really know what he's referring to. If you think about it, Isaac was promised 1 year. He was going to be born within that year. They went to Gerar. At some point, Abraham and Sarah had to come together to do Isaac, so it's probably they were only with Abimelech for a couple months. This would make sense. If Abimelech has just taken a new woman, essentially, for certain reasons, they're probably going to at some point have to come together relatively quickly. So, this is probably a short period of time, but God, it says, has closed the wombs of the people of his kingdom. So does this just mean that females, I'm talking human beings, I'm talking livestock, everything, that the cycle of life wasn't happening? Or does it mean that babies were full term and they weren't coming out? I don't exactly know what that is, but there's only a short period of time, and the people realized real quick that something was wrong, and it took Abraham praying and God pulling whatever he had put on those people back for that cycle of life to start up again. But Abraham makes the prayer, God fixes it. All right, so also, you can note the amount of gold that was given to Abraham. How many pieces? 1,000 pieces, of silver, not gold. Was currency really used a lot during this time? Like if you went and you needed something, did you go give people money? What did usually you give them or do? You would trade. If you need a sheep, you would take 2 goats because you wanted a sheep and that was valuable to you. It was more of a barter system. But Abraham has 1,000 pieces of silver now. which is going to be more than enough to cover another payment that he's going to have to make in about 40 years, which just is a very interesting number to me and we'll get to later. Something to keep in the back of your mind. So he's had this encounter with Abimelech. He's in Gerar. Now we move on to chapter 21. And it says that God remembered his promise, and they had a son, and they named him Isaac. And they circumcised him 8 days later. Remember, circumcision has been established at this point. Abraham's 100 years old. Sarah is 90. Just to make sure we also know the dates. So the promise is fulfilled, and everybody now lives happily ever after, right? Wrong. It wouldn't be interesting if they did. Now we get to see another consequence of Sarah and Abraham's very poor judgment years earlier. A few years after Isaac's born, verse 9 takes place, and it says that Sarah saw Ishmael mocking Isaac. Remember, Ishmael is 14 when Isaac's born, so he's older. Isaac's a little kid. So what does mocking mean? Does it mean that Ishmael was just making fun of Isaac and not letting him go? Was little Isaac, playing and doing something funny, and Isaac's just laughing at him, and Sarah is possibly looking for an excuse? Or is it something in the middle? Don't really know. But Sarah gets very upset. She goes to Abraham and demands that he kick out his other wife and other son again, because she's already done it once. Abraham has already kicked out Hagar and Ishmael one time before because Sarah told him to. Abraham actually stands up to Sarah this time. I remember, Ishmael and Abraham had to have a very close bond. Ishmael is Abraham's first son. He's had him this long. He has taught him so much. Ishmael is basically a man at this point. There had to be that bond. Abraham says, no, I'm not kicking him out. However, God tells Abraham to listen to Sarah, and again, that the descendants of Ishmael will be a great nation. It doesn't say good and moral nation. It says a great nation, as in very large. We talked about this last week. God kept his promise. If there was any doubt. So, Abraham listens to God, sends them both packing. We know there is contact later on. I don't know how much, but we will get to that. But this, again, had to be hard for Abraham. He must have felt like he was giving up part of his own heart when he watched Ishmael walk over that rise and disappear. Had to be difficult for him. All right, so moving on, Abraham and company, they've been in the territory of Abimelech now for several years, but it appears that Abimelech is starting to get a little bit nervous because Abraham, he's already a very wealthy, very powerful man, and now he's getting even larger. Half of it's Abimelech's own fault because he gave him a decent part of his property there with all the animals and the servants. So he meets with Abraham and asks him to take an oath that Abraham will not deal falsely with him or his offspring, but return the kindness that Abimelech has shown to Abraham. So there's a thought, doing some research here, that possibly the current Abimelech, remember this is probably a hereditary title, but Abimelech was getting old and probably was not going to be the king much longer, and he might have had a younger son, the future Abimelech, that was about to take over. He might have been concerned that Abraham would suddenly take the opportunity to take over his kingdom. It's a theory, but it would make sense because it says, not deal falsely with him or his offspring, but return the kindness that he's shown. Either way, Abraham makes this oath, he agrees, but he brings up a grievance of his own during this meeting. Abraham has dug a well, and it sounds like the servants of Abimelech have kind of taken it over. They've taken it away from Abraham. So Abraham brings this up. Abimelech responds in verse 26. We're in chapter 21 again. Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this. thing you did not tell me, nor did I hear about it until today. So apparently this was done without Abimelech's knowledge. But the two of them make a covenant. Abraham agrees to deal kindly in the future, and Abimelech agrees to leave him with the well. And in response, Abraham gives Abimelech sheep and oxen in exchange for saying that, yes, this is your property, this is your well. Something interesting happened in 32, if you look at it. Who else is involved in this transaction? There's another name mentioned there. Phicol. Who is Phicol? The commander of Abimelech's army. Why would this be a good person to have in this agreement? Any thoughts? Couple. First of all, any agreement needs to have what? A witness. Even today, if you go to sign any kind of legal document, what do you need? A witness to sign saying, yes, that is that person, I agree to it, I heard it, it's absolutely true. What happens if you don't have a witness? He says this, they say this. Who's right? We don't know. There had to be a witness to the agreement. Phicol is at least one of these witnesses. Phicol also could have ensured that what? That this covenant was respected. That the well actually was Abraham's. He was the commander of the army. He could have made sure that all the people stayed away from it. It was actually, he could have enforced this agreement. Also, if the theory that Abimelech's son was still going to be taken over soon, the commander of the army, what was his position in the government? His responsibility was going to, he was probably going to be a caretaker, a responsible party for this younger individual that was going to be learning the ropes, basically. So Phicol could have been like, the puppet master, the man behind the curtain, kind of pulling the strings a little bit. So Phicol being involved in this agreement is actually very important because it means the agreement is going to stick. Abraham names the place Beersheba, which becomes a really important location down through history. It continues to be great importance for Abraham's descendants to the Old Testament, even today. It's home to Israel's, one of their largest cities. Just for interesting sake, this is also where one of the last successful cavalry charges in World War I took place between the British and the Germans, full bayonets and everything, running across open fields with machine gun fire. I like history. Why is this place so important? Why was this place settled and fought over for millennia, thousands of years? People have been in this place. Why? It's all about one thing.
That tree.
That tree?
The tree, verse 33.
Yeah, probably not. Probably not. But the tree is part of the answer because it resulted from the main answer. Water. It is all about the water. That's why Beersheba was important then, why it's still important now. The geography of Beersheba is very interesting. It gets 8 inches of rain per year. 8 inches. Actually, less than 8 inches is average. How much do we get on average per year? How many inches of rain? 45. 5 to 6 times the amount of rain. And we complain that it's dry at times. Beersheba does not get enough rain to make it important just because water's falling from the sky. That's not the main reason. It's the geography. The water is all underground. As the water hits those Judean mountains, it's a downpour. It only happens a couple times, mostly of the year in the winter or spring months, but it is held underwater. That's what makes underground. That's what makes Beersheba so important. So this is the perfect transition into a little side study of water in the Old Testament. Yeah, we're going off topic here for a couple minutes. Why is this well so important? Couldn't Abraham just go get water anywhere he wanted? No, absolutely not. So the land of Canaan is, again, unless you're near the coast, it looks mostly like this. Just for fun, here's a couple satellite pictures. So obviously, this is us. This is Canaan, Judea, Holy Land, whatever you want to call it. Green means plants, brown means rock and dirt. You can see the difference. There is very little water on the surface in this area. There's a few ways, though, that you can get water. So, first of all, what are the main sources of water in the Old Testament people? Lakes and rivers. The Sea of Galilee is really the only large body of water within this region, but you really have to be near the shore to benefit it. Even this is only how it looks a couple times of the year, a couple months out of the year, winter and spring. A lot of times it looks like this. Again, you can see very little water. You can get fresh water if you are near the shore, but this only takes a little bit of area that gives you that access. Now, just for comparison's sake, how do you think Lake Erie, our smallest Great Lake in the U.S., compares to the Sea of Galilee? Lake Erie, bigger, smaller? Bigger. How many times do you think it's bigger? 155. Lake Erie is 155 times larger than the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is actually a very small place. You're looking at only like 4 miles across. This is not a big body of water, but it's the biggest body of fresh water in Judea. You have another source of fresh water. What do you think this is? The Jordan River. River. The Jordan Trickle, the Jordan Stream. This is the Jordan River. This is the largest continually flowing body of water in Judea. What do we know about the Jordan River? Clear, dirty? Dirty. What's the very, key person in the Old Testament that tells us this? I think you're on the right track. Naaman. Naaman was the outsider that came to seek healing, and he was told to dip himself in the Jordan River 7 times. Did he go and do it? Eventually. Why didn't he want to? It's dirty. I've got cleaner waters back in my homeland that I can go dip in. I don't want to go dip in the Jordan River. Is this a body of water you really just want to start drinking your heart out of? No. But these are the 2 main sources of surface water in Judea. Sea of Galilee, not a bad option, but you got to be right there. Jordan River, that's just nasty. You don't want to drink out of that. But it is surface water. You also have the Mediterranean Sea, the Dead Sea, the Red Sea. You do have other large bodies of water. What's wrong with these? Yuck. It's full of salt. It will kill you. You cannot drink this. These are really the only 2 main water sources, surface water sources. Springs. Springs are a good option. So this happens when you have those ranges of the mountains that go underground. They find a hard layer that they can't penetrate through, and they come back up as a spring. Now, the most famous spring in the Old Testament is En Gedi. This is where David ran to get away from Saul, was the spring at En Gedi, which is down on the Dead Sea. This is a very, very nice area. This is one place in all of Judea, and there's no other place like it. You might find a very few other springs. They're going to be trickles coming out of the ground in comparison to this. This is a nice place. This is not normal at all. There will be other springs. They're going to be very small. They're going to be well visited by wildlife. What's that mean? Fecal matter is going to be all around them, the very small bits of water. Not great sources, but there are some springs in Judea that can be used if properly maintained. Those are the 2 natural sources of water in the Old Testament. Now we get to some man-made surfaces, or man-made sources. Remember, you've got groups of people, you've got herds, you've got to have large, sustainable, fresh water sources in order to survive. Man got creative. First of all, you have cisterns. These are large underground chambers that would have been carved into rock, small opening at the top to minimize the amount of stuff that's actually going to get in. Large surface cavity underneath. Again, these would have been carved out of rock. If you look at this, so this would have been set most likely in streams, in rivers. It does rain, but only for a few months out of the year, and there are downpours. How do you capture that water and use it later? Through a cistern. What do you think this chamber up here would be for? If this is in a stream, what direction is the water flowing? That way or that way? It's probably flowing downhill. This basin would have been a filtration system. Yep, exactly it. You have a catch basin where you would have had sand, rocks, other things that would come in here. It could have settled out while purer water, purer, stress the water, ran into your cistern. Once you could cover the top, keep the sunlight out, this really isn't a bad option. You're going to keep water in there as long as you lined it with an impervious material, a clay or something else. It would keep water all year. This is not bad. Early spring, early summer, pretty fresh water. What's going to happen after 6 months? This is what your water looks like. Not great water to drink out of. Also, what do you think would have found this water after several months? Rodents, other wildlife. This is nasty stuff. But when it's either this or nothing, this is what you drink. All right, so those are cisterns. Again, pretty good option because you are capturing rainflow, but after a while, it does not look good. So your next source is wells. This is probably your best option. There is a lot of water in the area. The only problem is it's inaccessible. You've got to dig for it because it's all locked underground. There were a couple different types of wells. First of all, you could just have a hole in the ground, a straight shaft. This, looking on the internet, it is supposedly Abraham's well, thousands of years old. But it's a good example of what a straight shaft well was. This is what Abraham likely dug. Based on my little bit of research, Abraham's well was probably 12 feet across, circular in shape, and about 45 feet deep. It would have been lined with rock, probably about the first half, in order to keep the softer material out. And the last 15 feet would have been carved from pure rock. How many people have busted up concrete with a sledgehammer? Not fun. 12 feet, 15 feet, pure rock. They did not have steel sledgehammers. What did they have? Hand tools, yes, made of, probably a little better. Bronze. How many people have really pounded on some bronze? Tough stuff, isn't it? Cast iron. What do we know about cast iron? It breaks a lot, yes. Copper? This is what they were working with to break through solid rock. Was this easy? No. This is why Abimelech's people wanted this well, because it was a very labor-intensive, a very difficult thing to reproduce. Also, you look at this. So the way you would get water with this, to take a bucket, a jar, tie a rope to it, drop it down, pour the rope back up. If you look at it, this is a very old well, because look around here. These are rope marks in rock. How many times does a rope have to go against a rock in order to create a mark like that? A lot. So that would have been a straight shaft well. This would not work for a larger community. So larger towns, cities, had this, which is basically a tunnel type well. This was required because there is more water the deeper you go. So in Abraham's well, it was carved out of solid rock. Now rock is permeable for water. It would have slowly filtered in, and eventually you would have some water. You pull out a bunch of buckets of water, what do you have left? Nothing, rock, until that water slowly seeps back in. So if you had a lot of people, you needed to go much deeper so that you had more length for that water to pull back together. So they would have dug these tunnel wells. An example is, this was Tel Geezer. Actually, if you read that, it's very hard to find good pictures, but I found a few, just for illustrative purposes. So residents, usually women, men would not do this type of work, would take their jars, their pitchers. What were these made of? Clay, thick clay. This is not plastic jugs. They are taking massive jars that weigh a lot, empty, carrying them to this well, coming down and collecting water. How deep do you think this well is? In this case, 120 feet deep. That's a 10-story building. That's the interest. Those nice wooden steps with handrails did not exist. No. So these women would carry these large jars down a 10-story building, collect them with water, carry them back up another 10-story building, and then walk to their house, who was how many whatever away. This is how those communities got water. How many times a year did you take a bath? When it rained. You're probably right. Does this put washing somebody's feet in a different perspective? If you think about it, the act of washing feet is disgusting enough if you think about just the filth on their feet and then the act of humility of getting down and actually washing, basically you're bowing in front of someone washing their feet. What did you have to do before you got to that point? Get the water. That was even harder. I would scrub somebody's feet here anytime before I would walk down a 10-story building with a heavy clay jar and then carry water back up.
Did they get clean water when they did the feet, or everybody got washed in the same water?
I'm doubting they threw the water out after every pair. That's just my feeling, though. So this was an example, like I said, of Tel Geezer. Here's another example at Megiddo. So again, you have the tunnel. Here's the spring. So you would have lived up here. You're coming all the way down here. Here, there was actually a spring to the outside that would have been walled off. Why would you want to do that? In the case of conflict, of war, you would have access if people could get in there, but also you wanted to deny the invading army what? Water. In any battle or any invasion, it was customary for the retreating army to fill in all the wells. That way, if the army that was invading did not have water, how long could they stay? Not long. Pretty good defensive tactic, actually. What happened when the army left? You got to dig it all back out again. So a secure water source was the most important thing that any town had. And that's why they had a pretty heavy investment into making sure that they could get water whenever they wanted and to keep it away from everyone else. Jerusalem had such an important water system. If you look here, when you look at the tunnel of Hezekiah, there was a spring up here that there was an access shaft through here. They could go straight down in the winding stairs, but they dug a tunnel in order to divert this underground spring. This is where the spring came up out of the earth. They actually dug into it to get to it before it came out and brought it through the city of Jerusalem down here to the Pool of Siloam. What do you think happened to the water once it got there? Eventually, there is water that's going to be flowing out of the city. They diverted it into the underground caverns so that not even wastewater was coming out of Jerusalem. So if any invading army came, there was no water that was leaving the city. They actually put it back into the ground to deny any other armies from using it. This tunnel was 600 yards long, 1,800 feet in length. It has a slope of 12 inches. They started at each end and they met in the middle. That's pretty impressive. That's real impressive. They met in the middle and there's a slope of 12 inches over 1,800 feet. They knew what they were doing when it came to water. All right. Okay, so that was fun, probably diverting, maybe boring for a lot of people, but just a simple thing of water. If you don't understand what the people had to go through to get it, you miss the meaning of a lot of this stuff. How hard was it to get baptized? It was more difficult. Now it's very easy. Then it meant a lot because you had to work in order to either get to a place where you could do it or get enough water to where you could be baptized. Just something as simple as that brings on a whole new perspective if you don't understand the minds of what the people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Just to go get your water, you've got to walk up and down a 10-story building carrying a 50-pound jar empty. That's why I like this stuff. It gives us a whole new understanding of the Bible.
Didn't they used to steal each other's wells or something?
Oh yeah, this is a great example right here of where Abimelech's men were trying to take Abraham's wells. If you had a secure water source in the Old Testament, you were doing good. You were rich. If you had a nice algae-filled, moldy cistern, you were still doing pretty good. Any other thoughts or comments? Nothing? All right. Earl, would you mind closing this out, please, in prayer?
Heavenly Father, thank you for the time that we've been able to spend here tonight to learn more of the intricacies of your word, understand more of how life was back then, and how it also impacts us today, the way we do things. Father, pray that you be with us as we go through the rest of this week. We say so, pray in Jesus' name.